It's a great day today. If you don't know me, my name's Andrew, one of the pastors here on staff, and I'm just excited to just dive into the Word today. We're going to be looking at James 3, but before that, if you guys don't mind just joining me in prayer again. Dear Lord, we just come to you today, just so thankful for this day, Lord. Thankful for this week, the things you've given us, just the blessings that have occurred, Lord, for the church, just maybe in the lives of people here, for VBS, and just all the kingdom work we're seeing, Lord. We just thank you for that. Lord, I ask that you open up the hearts of the room. My heart, Lord, every single person in here, and kids in pre-K, that just today we hear a fresh, new word from you. That we just apply these lessons, Lord, and just hear what you came for us to hear, Lord. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, so today, like I said, we're looking at James 3, and we'll be in verses 13 through 18. But before I get into that, I always like to start a survey, or start the lesson with a survey. So real quick in the room, who in here has seen the show Suits? Decent, good amount of people. Now I'm going to do one I've done before. We got wisdom and intelligence, right? If you'd rather be the wisest person on the planet, raise your hands. What about the smartest person on the planet? I knew you guys were smart. Sweet. Well, Suits, really cool show about this, legal, day-to-day drama stuff, where this guy named Mike just walks into an interview. I'm not going to go into how he gets in that because it's a weird way, but walks into this Harvard law law firm interview, right? And he has no idea what he's doing. He's actually running from the cops, but again, whole nother story. But then he sits down, and as he's trying to hide from the police, he meets this guy named Harvey. Harvey is hotshot lawyer in New York, right? No one's better than him. And Harvey, the way the show puts it, life is like this. Harvey likes it like this. So Harvey, being as a guy who likes it like this, goes along with it. He starts asking Mike things. He's like, hey, why should I, hide you from the police? And they have this really cool moment in the show where you actually find out Mike has a photographic memory or an eidetic memory where if he looks at one thing one time, then he'll always remember it. Also, what an incredible, useful tool that would be. There are some things that I can never forget, and I'd rather forget them. I would love to be able to just, and then tell you what line and what word of the paragraph it is wild. But they go back and forth. He starts asking questions that, only a top lawyer in New York would know. But Mike, for some reason, has read all these law books. And so he's answering them. At one point, Harvey Googles something, and only Google should know that. And Mike still has the answer. Mike has all this, all this intelligence. He can read a book one time and just know everything about it. But Mike is still running from the police. Really, really smart guy, but he still finds himself in these situations. And I was rewatching the show this past couple of weeks, and it just reminded me of this sermon because that is life. It's that difference between wisdom and knowledge that matters the most. So like I said today, we're going to continue our study in James. So far we've talked about all incredible reminders, incredible exhorts for us, how we're supposed to endure in trials and suffering, how we have to take responsibility for our actions and move beyond just listening, but also, living a life of active obedience. We've talked about the sin of favoritism and just, how it's, again, such a small sin, but we can forget just how important it is. We also, of course, last week talked about the power of our speech and how the words we say and the conduct we use matters. But that brings us to the passage this week. It's a passage in which James is speaking about wisdom, how it correlates with the posture of our heart. And, like I said, we've talked about this before. A lot of people talk about wisdom all day long. It's really good. Same with knowledge. Knowledge is power, right? We've all heard that saying. But today we're going to look at something a little more specific. And that is where we're getting our wisdom from. It's not just so simple as to, I really wish it was. I was messing with Jay earlier this week. Proverbs 4:7, Bible talks about wisdom pretty clearly. Hey, wisdom is the foremost thing. get wisdom. But so yeah, be wise. It wouldn't be so easy to just go, I'm wise now. It's a lot of different, things you have to learn, maybe even just life experiences you have to go through. But today we're not going to just talk about just wisdom in general. We're going to talk about the two different types of wisdom and then, picking the correct one. So if you join me, we have it on the screen in gigantic letters that always freak me out. But James 3:13 through 18 talks about these two types of wisdom and where you're getting them from. Verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. So James, again, he's continuing this exhortation of the people who want to teach, people who want to preach. He's talking to Timothy. And he's saying, hey, at the end of the day, it's not enough simply to have the words to say, but you have to have something to say with it. It's not as simple as just having all this, we talk about a lot here, head knowledge versus heart knowledge. It's not as simple as just having all the answers to everything. Because, go back to the Suits example. Guys like going back and forth with a hotshot lawyer from New York who's never lost a case. And he's like, yeah, I'm the smartest guy in the room. But he's running from the cops. And it doesn't make sense. And we all probably know those people. But this specific passage proves that not only is having, wisdom so important, but where you're getting that wisdom from is actually even more important, especially for us Christians in our day-to-day lives. Knowledge, it enables us to take things apart. But it's the wisdom of the Lord that enables us to put those things back together and guide us in daily truth to God's word. Before we get into that, bring up point one real quick. And James, he starts this, in verse 13, starts it out just by putting something done so simply, just summing it all up. Heavenly wisdom is proven by humble conduct. Here, James says that true wisdom and false wisdom, are shown by our behaviors. Notice his words. Who among you is wise and understanding? Here's the answer. Let him show by his good behavior. His deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. In other words, James is saying a true Christian lives with this wisdom. We might say that a true Christian lives, wisely. We hear this word all the time. But wisdom is not just a matter of notions that you know or things you ascend to, but it shows in the way that we live, how we go about our day-to-day lives, at work, at home. I would say, especially when no one is looking, is when you can see how wise you are. So the true Christian lives with wisdom, over the course of their life, their choices in life. They're characterized by that divine wisdom. It's not just about having wisdom, but having that correct one. So, how do you know you're wise? Who in the room would call themselves wise? Nobody. I'd call myself wise, but that's, a pride thing. How do you know if you're wise? How does a person know, if they are? How many people in this room have 5 or 6 people who they go to for wisdom? Yeah? Who are they? Typically older people? Anybody? Is it younger for them? There's one of the wisest guys I know is 5 years younger than me. Always freaks me out because I'm like, you're a child. Anyways, but how do you know if they're if they have wisdom, and how do they know where that wisdom is coming from is true? See, all of us, we've probably gone to church, gone to school, heard people teach the right things, but then not live it out. And see, that, where that comes from is these people who, they preach the things, they teach the right things, they have all this knowledge, but they don't live it out. We see that the truth of the matter is that, their wisdom, or really just their knowledge, is a knowledge without heavenly wisdom, divine wisdom. And this is what James is talking about. So we'll kind of go into the two things he's talking about here, and that's two different types of origins of wisdom. There's heavenly wisdom, and then there's worldly wisdom. And then, spoilers, why heavenly wisdom is much, much better for us to go to. So there's a contrast in origin, and even a contrast in the operations of these two things here. See, James puts it simply, true wisdom comes from above, but false wisdom comes from below. In other words, there's heavenly, and then, man-made wisdom. I'm sure there's a lot of man-made wisdom that we attribute a lot of our lives to, and it's kind of a tricky thing, because there are good things, or good wisdom of the world to listen to sometimes, but at the end of the day, if that is where your full overall understanding of wisdom is placed, it leads to, a life astray from Jesus. Whatever does not come from God is destined to fail, no matter how successful it may seem. We've talked about this a lot. Christian living and earthly success, they don't mix. They don't mix well, especially around here, in Northwest Arkansas, in the U.S. How do we measure success, right? It's money. It's money. And then we read this incredible, Bible, this incredible passage of books that was put together a couple thousand years ago, and the entire time it's saying, hey, you don't need money, give it away, give it to your church. So it just doesn't make sense. But at the end of the day, it's the heavenly wisdom that we have to choose, that we're called to choose. And this is put pretty well here on the next kind of thing we'll go about, because we're going to point to earthly wisdom, no matter how good it seems, no matter how much money it might make you, it produces division and disorder. James characterizes it here by just a few simple words. Earthly wisdom is characterized by envy, strife, boasting, and deceit. The Bible has a lot of examples of man choosing their wisdom. And you would think we would read this and then go, okay, let's go earthly. But I'm going to go through a list of, the folly of man's wisdom here, where you think they'd learn. But that's really the entire Bible is. You think they learn. But the Bible does contain a lot of these examples. Building a Tower of Babel. Seems like a pretty wise enterprise, right? Who doesn't want a giant skyscraper? I don't like big cities. I would not like the Tower of Babel. I'm just going to throw it out there. But they have all the people there, everyone on the planet walking around, working together, have this one common purpose. But we know how that failed, or we know how that ended. It failed in confusion and a bunch of new languages that makes it hard for us to work together. It seemed wise for Abraham to go to Egypt when the famine was occurring in Canaan. But those proved otherwise as well. King Saul, he thought it was wise to put his armor on David, which is always such a funny picture in my mind of 5'4" David, real scrawny. You got 6'5" King Saul. He's like, here, this fits, and just drops it on him. But he didn't need that. He needed that divine wisdom to, go take out a giant with just a sling and a stone. The disciples even thought they were more wise than Jesus himself, which is always so funny because they lived and walked with him and still questioned him. They're talking to him. They're about to dismiss this great crowd and because they don't have enough food to feed them. What did we learn there? Jesus had other things in store. He said, put away your earthly knowledge, your earthly understanding, because there's something greater in store here. Roman experts in Acts 27, they thought it was wise to set for sail for Rome, even though Paul is telling them, hey, we can't go, we'll crash. And they're like, it seems fine. But again, there's this heavenly wisdom that Paul had that they didn't, but they still didn't listen. See, earthly wisdom, it has like a worldly source. There's 3 descriptions that James gives it here, along with the characteristics. Of course, earthly, focused only on this life. It's really easy to not just focus on this life because, right now it's all we got. Of course, there's the future everlasting life, but it's really easy to, fall into the earthly schemes like, oh, what am I going to do tomorrow? Or what am I going to do 10 years from now? Things about retirement. Focusing on this life only. Then there's unspiritual, the sensual things, the flesh. And then there's, of course, the demonic, reflecting, Satan's values, pride and rebellion. And these 3 aspects here, these 3 descriptions, is incredibly easy to, mix up one for the other. I feel like a lot of the times as Christians, we will point to the bad guy in the Bible, which is, he is the bad guy. But I remember growing up, my Mimi, love her to death, she would always say, Satan's making me sin. Satan's making me sin. I'm like, that, and looking back, I'm like, that's not how that works. There are demonic things in the world. There are demonic forces, and we have to pray to be ready for those. But really, at the end of the day, in our day-to-day battles, it's those earthly and sensual things that we have to battle against. And at the end of the day, when it comes to wisdom, that there's so many of, that it's hard to kind of, focus and pick the true one. Because those are the things that just makes life seem easier. And I was talking with my dad about it one time. Dad is an incredible business owner, owns a couple Chick-fil-A's. Go eat there. Not today, it's Sunday. But I was talking to him about, some just decision making in life, right? And I'm not going to say specifics, but we're talking. He's like, well, this is how I live. And it was something that was so against the Bible, and not a huge way, but something just straight up the Bible says to do this though. And it's about, a business owner. If one person leaves, you shouldn't, he's I'm not, they can go off in their own world. I'm not going to try to save them. I got to focus on my group. And I remember I sat there and I stared at him. And he's like, what? I go, how long have you been in church for? And he's like, my whole life. Why? I was like, that literally contrasts what the Bible tells us, what Jesus says to go after that one. He's like, well, in business and in life. And I'm like, we get into it all the time. It's always a good time and just a fun time for both of us because we both like to argue. But at the end of the day, I feel like that kind of just characterizes it in such a simple story. It does make sense if you're a business owner, right? There's one person who's just not having a great day, but 99 other people are having the best day of their life. What should you focus on? You should focus on your wins. That's a business thing. And it makes sense. But again, it's just this contrast between, hey, what is earthly? What is Christian? Or what is earthly? What is the right thing to do according to earth standards? And then what a Christian's called to do. Again, we're not, other side of the thing. Yeah, you want to celebrate with your people, but at the end of the day, you got to go check on that one. You can't let the lost sheep go. And we're sitting there in a Firehouse Subs on a Sunday morning, going back and forth and back and forth. And he's like, well, it just doesn't make sense. And I go, exactly. It doesn't make sense. But that's when it's most important to apply it. The earth and our flesh, it will tell us, do this temporary thing for this temporary gain. Abandon your values, make this much money. Oh, you can do that for this one night, it's fine. But that's when it's most important, right? We have to choose heavenly wisdom even when those temporary things can seem so attractive. Again, don't confuse the world's knowledge and the world's wisdom. There's a great deal of, knowledge in this world that can lead to success. It can lead to things that it can benefit from, right? It's not wrong to do well with your money and make a good life with it. But it's where that heart is. Where is that, characteristic found? What are you rooted in? There's a quote that I found here that I really enjoy. Man unlocks the secrets of the universe, but does not know what to do with them. Everything he discovers or devises turns against him. One writer said best, man has improved means to unimproved ends. Again, all these earthly things, all these man-made things, they're temporary. You know, I always put it best, you can't take your money to heaven with you. But at the end of the day, choosing an earthly wisdom will just lead to nothing. It'll lead to you choosing yourself over your friends, you putting Christ behind you and just focusing on yourself. But then James comes in here and contrasts it, and we'll go to point 3 with what heavenly wisdom does. See, heavenly wisdom, it produces righteous living and peace. James characterizes heavenly wisdom with a lot better characteristics, in my opinion. Pure, peace-loving, gentle, reasonable, merciful, full of fruits, impartial, free of hypocrisy. You know, just looking at the two contrasting comparisons, it's easy to pick which one, or in my opinion, which one is better. But it's the one that seems better that's actually harder to do. See, the third thing James says in this passage, you see it in verses 17 and 18. Here shows you the character and results of wisdom, which is from above. True wisdom, it can be hard to pin down, but it shows itself in its product. True wisdom is not always hard to see, isn't always easy to see, sometimes what can seem wise in one person's eyes can seem dumb in another's. But again, it's where those results are, where that character is found. We see this in an easier way to see. Sometimes true wisdom, it can be the hard truth that you have to swallow. And it's for that reason why it's so hard to see. Wounds of a friend are sometimes hard to distinguish from the barbs of an enemy. They hurt, but they're wise. And so also, true wisdom isn't always easy to see, but that's why we have to know the characteristics and results so that we can see why, or when they are, looking us blind in the face. First of all, it's pure. Where does heavenly wisdom come? It comes from the Lord. It comes from his word. It doesn't change in the season. It's in the foundation. And for us, it's a heart devoted to God that we, have that wisdom playing out in our lives. B, it's peace-loving. It seeks reconciliation rather than conflict, which everyone in here is human. It's real easy to hold on to grudges. Real easy to just be like, oh, that guy scorned me, so I'm going to do this against him. But again, heavenly wisdom calls us to do the opposite. Ends rumors and gossipy talk. See, it's gentle. It's showing kindness in your corrections. There's a fun example I love that if you've been in church for a long time and say you get a new believer, right? He comes into the room and he fixes this one thing about his life, something he's super convicted about. It's incredible. We love that for him. But then he makes it his job to go to every single person in the room and be like, you need to do this too. And it's, just sprinting, has passion, has zeal, and it's great. But at the end of the day, sometimes if you let those people run loose, then they're not so gentle. And that's where, we're called to be gentle. Be reasonable in our things. Be teachable. Always be willing to be corrected, as long as it's rooted in the word. Open to godly counsel. If a person's making their decision on their own, it's an echo chamber waiting to happen. But you have to be open to godly counsel. It's full of mercy and good fruit. True wisdom is active in sympathy and compassion. It's full of mercy, full of just grace for others, especially to those other believers in our life. It lives a life that blesses others. Go back to the money example. You don't want to hoard it. You don't want to do all these things with it. But it's okay to make good money, but you have to bless others with the blessings you've received. And that's what wisdom is. That's what godly wisdom is. Living a life of blessing others. It's full of good fruits. You can look at a person with true wisdom and measure that and be able to say, I see fruit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control in, some measure of that person. Not everybody's perfect at it. Some days, have their good days, have their bad days. But that's what you see. You see the result of their wisdom. True wisdom is full of good fruits. It's impartial. We talked about it a few weeks ago. Really easy to show the people you like more, show them favoritism. But we're called to be impartial. We're called to show the same love of God to the richest person in the room as we are to the poorest person, or the most sociable versus the most antisociable. But we're called to be impartial, show no favoritism. It's sincere. A genuine faith is one without hypocrisy. A true wise person is no hypocrite. It's a person with integrity who practices what they preach and believe, even when no one is watching. In my mind, especially when no one is watching. But going through all this, right? You see how James describes wisdom here. He doesn't describe it with the dictionary definition, and sometimes I really wish he did, because it'd make life so much easier. But he doesn't describe it with a verbal imperative, do this and you'll be wise. He doesn't even describe it with a definition. He describes it in a way that's just changes how we look at things. He shows you that true wisdom is by how it looks in a person's life. Because true wisdom isn't just about the notions you assert, not just the things you know, not just all the knowledge you've built up in your head over the years. It's how you're using it. True wisdom is about acknowledging the Lord in all your ways. So I got a last slide here, beautiful. Just compare and contrast, right? Earthly wisdom, it's self-centered. It's jealous, it's proud. It's divisive and produces chaos. Heavenly wisdom, it's humble, pure, peaceful, and merciful. It's a life that's fruitful and produces righteousness. And just looking at this right here, I know this one for me looks so much better, because we all know people who are self-centered, jealous, proud, divisive people. We probably don't like those people that much in our heads, but we're also sometimes probably those people for others. But just changing this perspective of what to do, which one to choose, knowing what it should result in, and leading us to these things, this humbleness, this pureness, this rootedness in God and his righteousness, this peacefulness, this mercifulness, and just a life filled with fruit and blessing. If we pick that, then it's just something that's so much better. We can go to our point 4 here. Because God's wisdom, this heavenly wisdom, produces blessings. Not always going to be easy, but again, in the long run, it's where we need to be rooted in. See, James returns to that word fruit. There's a vast difference between man-made results and God-given fruit. Fruit is the product of life, and fruit has seeds in it to grow more fruit. And usually it's the seed that is sown, but here it's, the fruit that is sown. As we share the fruits of our lives, the fruits of the gospel, doing that through bearing the fruit. A Christian life, we see, is just sowing and reaping that constantly. Excuse me. For us, every life is a life of sowing and weeping, and we reap what we sow. A Christian who obeys God and his wisdom sows righteousness, not sin. He sows peace, not war. And the life we live enables the Lord to bring righteousness and peace into the lives of others. So it blesses us, but at the same time, allows us to bless others. What we are is what we live, and what we live is what we sow. What we sow determines what we reap. If we live in God's wisdom, and we sow righteousness and peace, we sow humility, we sow all these things, we reap God's blessing through it. But if we live in a world of manly wisdom, worldly wisdom, we sow sin and war, we're constantly striving with people, constantly arguing, we're going to get it back to us. Because a divisive man leads to more divisiveness. And it's a serious thing to be like a troublemaker in, the family of God. One of the sins God hates the most is sowing discord among others. Lot followed the world's wisdom, brought trouble into the camp of Abraham. But Abraham followed God's wisdom and brought peace. Lot's decision led to good-for-nothing works, which back then, his decisions led to a bunch of major cities, all these things you could look at it and go, that's better. But everything he lived with went up in smoke and destruction. Abraham's decision, choosing the wisdom of God, led to blessing. A household, that would outnumber the stars, and ultimately a better thing for the entire world, that was leading to Jesus. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. Because a life lived with true wisdom, wisdom found from the Lord and not from the world, is one that produces blessing for themselves, but also others. So how, again, it's really easy, real weird to kind of get into this and be like, no definition, no step by step. It's kind of the point. He's wanting us to look at where we're rooted in. So I got some application questions here as we kind of wrap up of just things to constantly ask yourself as you go by life. 1, where am I getting my wisdom from? Again, Paul doesn't give this is wisdom, but where are you getting your wisdom from? Is it from the Word? Is it from church? Is it from a blessing from the Lord? Or is it, only decisions made to make money? Where am I getting my wisdom from? 2, do my actions reflect humility or pride? It can be a humbling one to go through. A proud person is not as good of a person as a humble person. That's someone who rejects the Lord and only wants to push themselves. Am I reflecting humility? Which of these qualities is most evident in your life? Go back to the list. Are you humble? Are you peaceful? Are you pure? Are you merciful? Are you showing good fruits? Breaking it down into those fruits. Am I showing that? And where could I work on it more? And that's the final one. Which one needs the greatest growth? Just saying, learned it in business. So like I said, business wisdom can be good. If you're not growing, you're getting left behind. There is no just stable point, right? You either have to be constantly learning or you're going to get left in the dust. If we ever accept that one of these characters is just something we're not good at, something we're not prone to, then we've failed already. So we have to challenge ourselves daily to go through and evaluate these characteristics, these, key points of heavenly wisdom, and see what we're doing, see how we're doing. What am I doing best? What am I doing worst? How can I grow? And going to that godly counsel for help.